Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking through some of the series that I just couldn't finish. As I was trying to come up with a list for this video, there were so many. It's honestly embarrassing how many series I have not finished, but let's start strong. It's embarrassing how many series I have not finished, and it's mostly because either the first book wasn't interesting enough for me to continue with the rest, or I used to really love the concept, or maybe one of the sequels didn't work out for me. There are tons of different reasons, so I'm gonna get through some of them. The first one is From Blood and Ash by JLA. I loved this book actually, and I mentioned it in my current favorite romances, which is now a very outdated video. This was my first fantasy romance. This was my first spicy book. I loved Poppy because she was an absolute badass, and it was also the first time that I'd ever ordered a sequel on audiobook, and the sequel did not work for me at all. I got halfway through and just could not finish it. It was super lovey-dovey, overly cheesy between Poppy and Castile. They were also just mostly traveling from one place to another, and there wasn't an overall comprehensive plot or direction to the story. I think it would have been a lot more interesting to hear Kieran's perspective and maybe have a love story with him as opposed to just following the same old romance for a trilogy. And I think now she's extending it to 6 books. This is 613 pages. So these are thick and a lot to get through of the same boring couple. So I will not finish the series. Another one of my favorite all-time romances is The Deal, which I mentioned in that video, by Elle Kennedy. I loved that so much. Hannah is probably one of my favorite heroines in any book series, and Garrett is ultimate book boyfriend. However, I tried The Mistake, which is a sequel, and I DNF'd it 2 times. I just do not like Logan. I don't understand his character. He irks me so much. So then I tried the Briar U series because it's brother's best friend, which is one of my favorite tropes, and I DNF'd that one too because Summer kept throwing herself at Fitz, and I just cannot take it when the guy shows no outward interest and the girl, either party. I like when both of them are equally into each other or equally standoffish but into each other, like when it's the same amount. But she just kept pushing and pushing, trying to get at him, and he was like, Fitz, I think is his name, Fitzy, something like that. And he was just like, nah, this is not cool. Yeah, it's just not my thing. I don't like when one party is more attracted than the other. It just doesn't feel romantic, and I don't think I can continue on with either the Off-Campus or Briar U series, which is the spin-off. Next, we have Aurora Rising, which is the first book in the Aurora Cycle trilogy. I loved this. I had so much fun reading it. I also bought the sequel, and then I did some more research on Jay Kristoff and found out that he's not that great of a guy and kind of a racist, and it just made me feel really icky about picking up anything related to him again. I'm just not really compelled to finish the series. I also had bought the Illuminae Files, the first book of that one, and I just don't know if I can push myself to read it because I just feel too icky. Yeah, and it's almost embarrassing to read it. Like if I put that on my Goodreads, I'd feel actively embarrassed because I wouldn't want anyone to think that I would support a racist like that, because I don't. And it's just, stay away. But beautiful covers, but yeah, don't like him anymore. The next series is the Addicted series. I think I talked about this one in my March wrap-up, and I DNF'd it. It wasn't my thing. I don't think I'll ever go near that series again. It was actually really interesting to read about addiction. I've never had a book where both of the main characters had an addiction that they were working through, and seeing how that they coped and how they hid that addiction from others because they knew that they would be judged. I thought that was really interesting and a really new and fresh perspective to take with a book. And almost their addictions made them more likable and more real as people, because if they didn't have that addiction aspect, they would have been a bunch of spoiled rich kids. So it gave them more depth as people. But them being together felt more toxic toxic than an epic love story. Like, it's just, I don't think they were good for each other. I think Lily should have moved to Europe, gotten her own situation, gotten her job, like made her own new set of friends that wouldn't judge her, that would support her no matter what, and not facilitate her addiction like Lo does. The relationship was just not fun to watch, so I stopped reading about 2/3 of the way through. This next one is not going to be a surprise. Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. Also, The Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. Two of the most boring books that I have ever read. Oh my gosh, this was such a slog to get through. I thought it was going to be like mafia fantasy romance. That sounds epic. But the mafia dude was like nice. He just kind of forgave people their debts. It was just, don't do it next time. And nothing really happened. It was, like, in the concepts themselves sound really good. Like, they were kidnapped and chained together in forced proximity, but it was so anticlimactic. The only good scenes in this, see, I tabbed it because I was angry, and then I stopped tabbing it because I started skimming it. But yeah, it's just a bunch of post-its of me complaining about different things within the book. And oh, this part right here made me really mad. Okay, the action scenes were good, but there were very few action scenes. Kazi was a knockoff Walmart version of Inej from Six of Crows. Jace was boring, and didn't like this, but the cover is stunning. This is probably one of the most beautiful books that I own, so I can never get rid of it. I just hate what's inside it. Continuing with mediocre fantasy, we have Serpent and Dove. This one, it didn't even make me feel any strong emotions. It just was like, okay, it's a fantasy romance, blah, kind of bland. And there's nothing incentivizing me to read the sequel. I had no interest in any of the characters really, or to find out what happens next. And the sequel gets pretty bad reviews, so yeah, probably just won't continue, won't read the series. It was fine. We then have, oh my gosh, this book makes my blood boil. Shatter Me. Oh my god, Shatter Me. This was the most infuriating book to read ever. What was that writing style? Like, every sentence had metaphors, maybe even 2 metaphors. And it was just so jarring. It almost takes you out of the story because the metaphors were like grotesque. Sometimes like comparing things to eyeballs, and I don't know, it just was icky. It took me out of the story. I couldn't pay attention to what was actually going on. The world just felt underdeveloped and the characters were quite flat. I kind of wanted to get out of Juliet's head because I didn't like her. So I would have liked to see some other perspectives. I know Warner gets his own, I think he gets his own little novella or his perspective. So I think that would be more fun to read about, but it would have been nice for that to be woven into this book as well. Juliet just kept whining about the same things over and over again, and then there was the whole thing with her and Adam and their relationship, and they had absolutely no chemistry and no connection at all whatsoever. But then they're suddenly declaring their love for each other. Like halfway through, there was just no reason to root for anyone in the book. There were 2 redeeming factors. One is that you could notice Juliet gaining confidence throughout the story. 2, Warner, I think he's an interesting character, and I would love to see him improve as a person or understand his background. I think that would be interesting, but not interesting enough to warrant reading the rest of the series. The next one, I was so anticipating loving this book. Like, it was just everything that I thought that I wanted in a book. It's based off of Muslim folklore, which I grew up listening about. Like, I was told, my mom would tell me stories about the jinn and how my great uncles in Pakistan were visited by the jinn and the buddies, and how they granted wishes and did deals. And so I really wanted to learn more about the world and learn more about the magic system or the system of the jinn, because I never understood that before. Also, our main character is a hijabi, which I've never read a book with a hijabi main character. It just seemed like a perfect book for me. And it wasn't. My main issue with this were the characters, because I did not like any of them. One thing I do want to commend though really quick was Nahri. She wore a hijab the whole time, and it never held her back. On the contrary, it many times helped her and protected her from the elements. But Nahri was just very angry and defiant at the most inopportune moments, but then would let Dara treat her terribly. Dara was arrogant and egotistical and didn't have a lot of redeeming qualities. Ali was mad and confused the whole time. Also, the world building was quite confusing. There were 6 different types of jinn, but even within the 6 different types, different people referred to each type by different names. And then each different type of jinn had different political motives. I just had to at one point forget. Like, I just had to gloss through all of the important world building stuff and make it up in my brain, which is unfortunate because I felt like I was missing out on key parts of the story. This was really unique, but just didn't work for me. Okay, those are all of the series that I'm going to be talking about today. Let me know if you've read any of them in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next video.